Alrighty, we are back yet again, all amigos. All prophecy fulfilled. Lesson number 20 of my series, Gentiles, Christianity's best kept secret. Let's keep this under your hat, okay? Okay, last lesson, we looked at Revelation chapter 7. Today we're going to look at Revelation 14. And then for the grand finale, next lesson, we'll look at Revelation chapter 5. Very quick recap. Chapter 7, what did we see that we need to take note of as we enter into chapter 14? Number 1, we saw 144 sealed of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Again, zero doubt as to the identity of this group. Number 2, we saw a great multitude that no one could number of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. Can you hear the Abrahamic underpinnings in that? I hope you can. We'll talk more about that. Number 3, this multitude came out of the great tribulation, the very tribulation that Jesus warned his audience about, that was on the cusp in that generation. Number 4, this great multitude was singing about their salvation. And again, we've covered time and time again that salvation, according to the prophets, was basically and simply deliverance from the death and the curse of the law that only Israel was under. And it makes you have to wonder, how is this great multitude connected to or attached to the law? Number 5, I had a pen in my hand, I couldn't quite do it. Number 5, this is a throne room scene. In other words, it was based around the throne. You see a lamb, you see 4 living creatures, you have angels, you have elders, and we're going to see this cast of characters as we continue, and it's important. Okay then, flip over to Revelation chapter 14. What do we see there? Well, in verse 1, Revelation 14:1, behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000. Well, by golly gee whiz, there they are again. Same group as chapter 7. Now remember, this group, the 144,000, in chapter 7, they were identified as all 12 tribes of the children of Israel. They were sealed. They were elect. And by golly, just think back in your memory banks here, who was always the elect, the chosen, according to the prophets? That was always Israel. Well, here these are, and they are sealed. They are elect. Now, what the heck, pardon my French, what the heck are these Israelites doing? Take a look at Revelation 14:2 through 5. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the 4 living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These are redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Now, right off the bat, it looks like these 144,000 are in the exact same place as the great multitude back in chapter 7. Does it not? Both are around a throne. Both are worshiping the same Lamb and God on that throne, and both seem to be doing it the same way, by crying out or by singing. Either way, they're all worshiping. And I want you to notice that there's even the same cast of characters in both scenes. You've got the 4 living creatures. Remember that chapter 7? Let me put it up on the screen just to jog your memory here. Revelation 7:9 through 11. Behold, a great multitude, which no one can number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing on the throne before God and Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and the Lamb. And all the angels stood around the throne, and the elders, and the 4 living creatures, and fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God. Okay, so to me, this great multitude in the 144,000, they're sounding pretty darn similar at this point. But let's continue. Now, you know how I'm always talking about contextual clues within a text. And if we just pay attention to those, they kind of point us in the right direction if we're willing to follow those clues. And like in chapter 7, there were so many at the latter part of chapter 7 that we didn't even touch, for time's sake. And even here, there's so many that I'm not even going to touch, but we have to pay attention to the clues. Let me just give you an example, and I don't want to rabbit trail this too much, but for example, for some reason, the first thing that I noticed that kind of popped out in my mind here was that there was no deceit in these 144,000. I thought, well, that's interesting. But you know what that reminded me of? That reminded me of Nathaniel. Remember when Jesus comes walking up to Nathaniel, and he's like, "Yo, Nathaniel, behold an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit," or no guile. Now that's interesting. What do you suppose Jesus was getting at? Because we see basically the same thing here in Revelation 14, right? Well, first off, you know what? Nathaniel was a Jew. He was an Israelite. He was the seed of Abraham. Now, secondly, you know what? It seems as though he qualified that X factor, that faith factor. He seemed to be a man of faith. He had a clear conscience before God, and I think that's the idea of having no deceit or no guile within him. Nathaniel was one of the elect. Not all Israel was of Israel. Remember that? But Nathaniel was. He was an Israelite indeed, in whom there was no guile. And he was probably part of this 144. But in any case, that's just a little clue within the text that we can kind of rabbit trail into. But I digress. So, back to chapter 14. What do we have here in chapter 14, verses 2 through 5? Well, we have 144,000 who are redeemed, and they are singing. Now, first off, notice these folks are using harps as they sing. And, that doesn't really seem important right now, but it is kind of an important detail, and we're going to circle back to that a little bit later. But I want you to notice that the text explicitly says that only those 144,000 who'd been redeemed could learn this song. Only them. Only this 144,000 could sing it. Folks, again, I don't know if you see how important this really is, but the 144,000 is specifically those of all the 12 tribes of Israel. These are Israelites, the 12 tribes redeemed, playing harps, singing about redemption, a redemption that only they'd been promised and needed because only they'd been under the death and the curse of the law. Joe Blow pagan had no reason to be redeemed from a law that he was never under, thus no reason or right to sing this redemption song. This is huge. This is mammoth. Only the 144,000 could learn the redemption song. Only the 144,000 were redeemed. If you can't learn the song, you don't have a right to sing it. Now, I know that somebody's going to say, hey, dude, these are only the first fruits. I noticed you haven't talked about that. They're the first fruits, which means there's going to be a lot more fruit coming, right? And there's going to be more harvesting after these first fruits, like the rest of all humanity, man. They were only the first fruits. Then comes the rest of everybody else. Look. That is based on assumption, and it ignores the actual concept of first fruits within Israel's story, in Israel's law, I guess. And it's because of this. And you know what? And so many want to believe that the new covenant was offered to all humanity, or to the rest of humanity. And that is why so many think, or they want to assume, that the rest of mankind have been following these first fruits into the kingdom for the last couple millennia, right? And ultimately, everybody's going to make up that great multitude that we see in Revelation 7. But no, that's not really how the first fruit works. So I really didn't want to rabbit trail into the first fruits, but I know some people are going to mention it. So I'm just going to take 10 minutes to kind of deal with it adequately here, I think. And I'll give you my opinion. I'm going to go kind of out on a limb on this one, but hear me out. Now, some people say that the first fruits is simply the best portion. Kind of, like set aside, holy to the Lord, if you will, and offer to God. And I can see that. I definitely can see that. After all, Israel was Yahweh's portion. They were his inheritance, right? They were holy to the Lord, or at least they were supposed to be holy, separated to the Lord, right? Separated like a first fruits, if you will. But Israel basically was God's first fruits. Jeremiah 2:3. Israel was holy to the Lord, the first fruits of his harvest. So there's a connection between the first fruits and holiness, a relationship between first fruits and being uniquely holy and separated to God. And this was always and only first covenant Israel. Only they had his laws. They were special to Yahweh. Deuteronomy 7:6, for you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen, hey, they are the elect, has chosen you to be a people for his prized possession above all peoples on the face of the earth. So, simply put, Israel was Yahweh's first fruits, and that's what we see in the 144,000. So there could be something to that as far as being the best portion or holy to God, but I'm not really firm on it. And this is where I might differ from some of my IO friends, because in my opinion, here we go, going out on a limb here, in my opinion, there does seem to be a sequential element or an order implied. But, let me be clear on this, okay? The concept of first fruits offering, which is obviously tied to Israel's law, it certainly does not, I cannot say this enough, it does not imply one after another, after another, after another in perpetuity. It does not. And it never meant, it never meant that there would be a second fruits, a third fruits offering, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth fruits offering, up to what, 199th fruit offering. It never, ever meant that. No. When Israelites gave a first fruits offering, they didn't keep giving another and another, another and another, until there was nothing else to give. No. The harvest came in, they gathered it, and they offered a first fruits offering. So, now, again, I said that I believe that there can be, or there is, a sequential element or an order implied. But look, we got to use our heads here. Just think with me for a second. Don't extend this out, to infinity and beyond, as Buzz Lightyear would say. We have to understand the first fruits order within two parameters, okay? Those who are being gathered and the time frame of the gathering. You have to understand first fruits within those confines. The first fruits that were being gathered were elect Israelites, and the time frame was during the gospel message gathering, before and right up to the end. Right there. We have to honor the time frame when we interpret anything. And this is where I think people just go berserk and they just don't want to hear it. Like, for example, off the top of my head here, John 6. Jesus made it clear. No uncertain terms. He knew who his sheep were. He knew his elect. None of his sheep, none of the elect could come to him unless the Father drew them. He would not lose any of his sheep, any of his elect. But you know what? All that belonged to him, all of them, all the elect would be what? Raised up at the last day. So you can't extend anybody being raised up, anybody being gathered beyond the last day. The last day came and went because the last day belonged to Israel because it was Israel's resurrections. You cannot extend the first fruits or a gathering beyond that. For example, here's what I was thinking. 1 Corinthians 15:23 says, but each in his own order. Christ the first fruits, afterwards, those who are Christ at his coming. Now, for those who suggest that, the first fruits means the best portion, you kind of have a point, I guess, if you look at it that way. Was Christ the best portion of Israel, I guess? Well, I suppose you could say that. He was the Holy One of Israel, right? And without the best, I suppose, according to this verse, you don't get the rest, right? That'd make a good preaching segment, Christ the best, and then come the rest. Can I get an amen? But listen, here's what I'm trying to say. There was an order here that I see. But that does not mean that the order as it relates to the gathering just keeps going on and on and on after the end comes. No, all Israel saved as a whole. That was God's harvest from the nations. The gospel went out for an entire generation, really. Not all the elect were gathered at the same time at once, right? And I think that's what we see in Revelation. That's what I'm trying to get at here. Like I just read in 1 Corinthians 15 here, the culmination of God's entire harvest from the nations would come at his coming. So, like I said, obviously, they're not all gathered at the same time. That implies an order, but not within all humanity, an order within all Israel, the elect who were being gathered. You see, these 144,000, in my opinion, could simply be the first fruits of that harvest. So in my opinion, the 144,000 don't necessarily have to be the complete or the full number of elect that would ultimately be redeemed. When would that happen? At his coming. Because not all had been gathered yet. Now, why do I say not all had been gathered? Stay with me on this one. Because his coming was at hand. And I'm going to show you this in a second. In other words, these 144 that were redeemed, these were the 144 up to that point. Remember. 144,000, that's symbolic. That is representing the who. It's not representing the literal exact how many. It's representing the who. It's their identity. And I think more would be joining these 144,000 as the time was at hand, the time was near. Why do I say that? Because we have these guys sitting around this throne singing about this stuff from verses 2 through 5, right? I just read that to you. But immediately after this, starting in verse 6, what do we see? And I know we have to be careful trying to put, a timeline and chronology on stuff in Revelation. But what do we see right after this throne scene? What do we see? Revelation 14, 6 through 7. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him. Why? For the hour of his judgment has come. Now see, I always thought, or I guess I just assumed, that these throne room scenes here were describing like heaven after the end, after everybody had been gathered, after God's judgment and after his coming. But I don't think so. According to this, the hour of his judgment was just about to be dished out. In fact, I think if we go to Revelation 15 at the beginning, I think it talks about how his judgment had just been dished out. That's like after. I need to verify that. But if you look here at the end of chapter 14, this is where God's wrath is just about to be dished out. We see one like the Son of Man, some angels, stuff like that, and they're taking a sickle and they're preparing to thrust it in. Why? Because the harvest was ripe. Verse 19. So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it to the great winepress of the wrath of God. So in my not so humble opinion, this actually fits well, I think, with Matthew 24. And I think it just gives more evidence to the fact that the 144 are the great multitude. Now, as I read this, let me go to Matthew 24 real quick. Try to visualize that throne room scene in Revelation, okay? They're singing about salvation and redemption and all that stuff. But judgment is on the cusp, okay? And the hour of judgment had come. So the Lord's coming was imminent. So backing up here to Matthew 24. Therefore, verse 15, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, okay? He's talking to his disciples here. When you see this, folks, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, because it's all going to hit the fan. Verse 21, for then there will be great tribulation. Now we know the great multitude of Revelation came out of this time period, right? Such as has not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, nor shall ever be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Now, wait a minute. We've discussed the elect were always Israel, and we know those 144,000 were sealed and elect. Interesting, huh? Verse 29. Now, so you have that tribulation. Verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, so here comes the judgment. Here comes the judge. Here comes the judge. Here comes that same judgment that we see that's on the cusp in Revelation 14. All the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven in power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather, there's a gathering, together his elect, there's the elect, from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Remember the angels in Revelation 7. Where were they? They were standing at the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth. So here we see a great tribulation, and remember that those of the great tribulation in chapter 7 had come from this great tribulation. They died first. So there's your order. I think that's your order right there. These are the 144,000 first fruits singing before the throne. But the tribulation wasn't over yet. But it would be soon. For the elect's sake, those days were shortened. So it seems to me, as Joe Walsh would say, it seems to me, just like Revelation 14 says, the hour of judgment had come. And we're taking a look at that in Matthew 24. So what happened? After the tribulation, he sent his angels. They gathered his elect, all the elect, the remaining elect from the four winds. When? At his coming. 1 Corinthians 15:23. Christ was the first fruits. The elect began to be gathered through the gospel. Some entered the throne scene before others. That's what I'm saying. But ultimately, at the end, at his coming, the rest who were Christ, aka the elect, would come gathered at his coming. Now, if you still don't think the 144,000 is the great multitude, I'm sure you're probably not buying this, and that's fine. But stick with this. And you know what? Next lesson, I don't think you're going to have any reason but to not buy it. Or to buy it. I think I said that backwards. Okay, do you see my point here? Are you seeing? I know I'm hashing it way too much here, but there was an order, but only until the end at his coming. So if these 144,000 are first fruits, it simply means they are the first fruits of the elect. The first of the 144,000, and the rest of their brethren would soon join these first fruits at his coming, and they would bring in the fullness. So you see, I think we've fallen from a false notion that because they're described as 144,000, it means that's the total number. Nobody else can enter. Again, it's a symbolic number representing their identity. It's representing their identity as Israel, the elect. right? But it's not representing their numeric fullness. One last time. Only the elect of Israel was promised a gathering from the four corners, and that would all come to an end when all were gathered, and the final gathering would come at his coming. 2 Thessalonians 2:1. Now, brethren, concerning the coming of the Lord Jesus and our gathering together to him. He's talking to living, breathing people, according to the story. Man, I beat that into the ground. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry, I guess. I mean, I felt like I had to go over the first fruits because people are going to mention it. So, okay, here we go. Let's bring this down again. Let's give this a final recap so we know exactly what we need to go going into Revelation 5. Here you go. Let's reduce this down. In fact, I'm going to do Revelation 7 and Revelation 14 recap right here. Revelation 7. Number 1, again, 144,000 sealed of all the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. We have number 2, a great multitude that no one could count of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. Number 3, this multitude came out of the great tribulation. Number 4, this great multitude was singing about their salvation. And number 5, the throne room scene with the cast of characters of a lamb, the 4 living creatures, angels, and elders. That's what we have in chapter 7. Revelation 14, what do we have? Well, pretty much the same thing. Number 1, 144,000. We know who those are. Number 2, we have 144,000 singing about their redemption. Just like the great multitude was basically saying about their salvation. Number 3, we have 144,000 singing and playing harps. Seems rather insignificant. It'll make more sense in Revelation 5. Number 4, only these 144,000 could sing this song. Only these 144,000 were redeemed. And number 5, again, we have that throne room scene with the lamb, creatures, angels, and elders. Same cast of characters as Revelation 7. I know that was a lot. That probably seemed like a bit of a rabbit trail, but just that final summary there, that's really what you need to know going into the next lesson. So if I rambled a wee bit, it's the way it is, as Bruce Hornsby would say. But it's all going to come together next lesson, part 3, Revelation chapter 5. We will see you then, my friends. Take care, and adios.